Hi there everyone, this is going to be my first video for YouTube. I'm going to be doing a Let's Play series of Kerbal Space Program. I've been playing it for about 3 years now, and I thought I'd be doing a series based around the career mode, but it's going to be more of a historical based progression of the career mode. I'm going to be following the steps that the US and Soviet Union took in the 60s, and I'm going to continue it to moon bases and things that are going to be hopefully in our future. What I'm building now is an Icbm style rocket, which is one of the first things to actually have gone into space. This one looks kind of like the American Titan missile that was used in the Gemini series of missions. It's supposed to be based on the R-7 that the Soviets used, but for that to be the case, it would need extra stages on the side. They used more boosters for liquid-fueled stages. They were basically extra fuel tanks that would disconnect when they were empty. What you can see now is me prepared to launch. It looks like a Titan rocket, but here we go, separating the staging and launching. But the throttle isn't up far enough, so I drop down to the launch pad, but it's okay. Everything stays on there. So yeah, the first objects into space were the German-based V2 rockets that scraped the edge of space when they were used. In the post-war period, they were sent to the US and reused, and a lot of the German scientists were hired by the Russians and Americans. I mean, that's people like von Braun and all of his team who went across the United States, but they also went to Russia as well when the Russians expanded across Germany. They basically did all of the work for the Americans because of the work they put in during World War II. Out of America and Russia, Russia probably had the biggest start because they developed Katyushas during World War II and had a lot of experience of at least rocket-powered weaponry during that period. The R-7, which was the first real ICBM, had the same basis as most ICBM in how they worked. They had a big booster stage at the beginning and also had a separate stage that would drop off from the side. But when that was empty, it would have a mid-stage section, which would be very small, and would be used to adjust the direction and inclination of the warhead where it was going to be aimed at. And of course, the warhead stage could have potentially many different interior warheads that had their own propulsion and could pick out targets closer to the objective. And yeah, it seems to be going okay. It's quite a straight launch, running out of fuel and decoupling. And I've used the wrong decoupler, but it doesn't matter too much. Nothing too bad happened. I'm not really sure what Kerbals would be aiming at, because there's not a lot on Kerbin, to be honest. There's just basically the vehicle hangars and nothing else on the entire planet. There's one other thing, but, well, you might see that in a future video. Kerbals are plant-based life forms, so maybe there's some kind of invasive fungal spores on another continent that are risking the lives of Kerbals all throughout Kerbin. So yeah, this is the mid-stage, and I'm going to basically just use this to redirect where I'm going to and change the inclination. I'm going to aim for the lake on this next continent because I decided that for some reason that would be better than detonating it over the land, even though an explosion's still an explosion. Doesn't really matter where it goes off. So yeah, the R-7 rocket, basically in what would be the future to the 60s nowadays, is the new Soyuz rocket. It would go on to launch the Sputnik-based missions. It would go on to do the Vostok, which was Yuri Gagarin's mission, Sputnik 2, which carried, I think it was Laika into space. It was the basis for all launches that Russia and the Soviet Union have used since. So the Army started using it in 1959, but it was in development from 1953. It had a massive production time, basically because everything was done for the first time on this project. was the first thing designed to travel through space and use it as an advantage for getting distance. The main problem was targeting. They had to maintain radio communication, and this was before satellite communications. And a lot of it had to be programmed in because it would be around the other side of the planet. So yeah, I've released my warhead, and it's coming in now. This would be the last point of no return for the warhead. Although some of them did have targeting from beyond then, and modern ones have satellite communication right up until impact. But yeah, this has no course corrections from now on. It's just a ballistic dead weight, basically. Let's just say, okay, there's no warhead in here. It's a test. And it really is just a battery and antennas because I'm using the RemoteTech mod. So that's why I need the antennas to actually be able to control it. Oops, that was an explosion. Yeah, I've also got deadly reentry, which would create real heat damage, and I guess that was just the Procedural Fairings mod interacting with the deadly reentry, but everything seems to have been okay. Not sure what that is. I think that's supposed to be like moisture vortexes or something. It couldn't be sonic boom because you wouldn't see that if you were traveling with the object, but let's just say it's a sonic boom. So we're coming into target and we're slowing down quite a lot. An Icbm probably wouldn't want to be this slow that it could almost touch the ground without any problems. But so yeah, that was basically a US Atlas type missile, an American Icbm that was used up until 2003 from the 1960s. They were very, very successful, and they did go into space. They launched the Gemini missions. So yeah, decommission your nukes and you too can into space. So let's have a look at how we did. That was certainly into space. That was, what is that, 117,000? I can't really see here. 70,000 is when space starts in Kerbal Space Program, so that was definitely into space. So let's have a look now at what we did next. I'm going to keep to the philosophy that that was a successful launch body, that we're going to take the basis of our space launches. We're going to use the Icbm that we've developed. So we're going to use what is the K1 or R7 in real life to launch our KERBNIK or Sputnik vehicle. The first object into space for the purpose of going into space. I mean, that's not exactly true, what I've written there. It should be into orbit for the purpose of going into orbit. There were Icbm Trials that grazed the edge of space. There were all of the weather balloons at that point that went into space, technically. And then there were a lot of X-15 pilots, I think, by this point, that had gone close. The X-15 pilot who actually went into space didn't get there until after Sputnik 2. So the actual Sputnik probe managed to complete 1,440 orbits before it died, but it was only tracked for 22 days because that's how long the batteries last for. But it was actually only rated for 2 weeks, which is impressive. Because they really didn't expect or know how it would cope with that, so I guess having redundancy is always nice. What I'm building here isn't really like the real Sputnik because Sputnik had no propulsion. But I've included the RCS so that I can deorbit it eventually, because KSP doesn't model real orbital drag. 70,000 is a hard limit, and there's no particles above that would actually slow it down or create drag, so I'm going to have to use that to deorbit it myself eventually. And the antennas kind of work like the ones on Sputnik. They're there for the aesthetics, basically, but I need at least one for the mod to work so I can control it. But here we go. It's on the Titan launch stage, which is supposed to be like the R7. And I'm going to full throttle up this time because I don't want to drop down and hit the launch pad again. There we go. Quite a nice straight launch. I'm going to use the flight computer through here because that's how I'm going to play this series. If it's a robot, I'm going to give it commands through this. If it's a Kerbal manned Kerbal, vehicle, I'm going to do it manually. But it's exactly the same thing. If I'm flying at a pitch of 80, it's no different putting in the number or manually pointing the nose at 80. It makes no difference, really. So yeah, this is quite a straight flight. So the actual Sputnik, I remember from being in secondary school, which should be high school for Americans who want the equivalent. My physics teacher told me that he used to listen to Sputnik as it would fly over. You could actually do that on a regular radio receiver. You could detect the pulses. It wasn't some kind of restricted frequency or strange or lower height. Part of the point of it was that anybody could listen to it. It was used to make a massive scare in America, which changed policy basically. News ran with the pulses. Um, it started a change in policy because they were now prepared to throw money at what was then not NASA, it was the Navy, Air Force, and Army launching systems that all had their own systems. And they all decided that they had to get into space because the Russians had got there first. It started the space race. When Sputnik was launched, there was no such thing as a space race. It was a purely scientific mission. There was a lot of purpose in it. It wasn't for jingoistic reasons. Sputnik 4, just a little metal ball, did actually have quite a lot of science equipment in it for being the first object into space. It certainly wasn't a dead weight, and I'll talk about that later. At the minute, we're just about running out of fuel. So, yeah, I've kept throttle up the whole way. I had to feather it a bit further down so that it didn't overheat. The mainsail engines do like to do that. So, yeah, and I'm pitching below the horizon here so that I can stretch the orbit out with the engines on full because I don't need any extra height. If you pitch below the horizon, you can keep the height of the orbit about the same, but you can push it further as you put energy into the orbit. I'm not sure if real space engines can do that, whether they can just wobble about by using the gimbal like I've done there. Like flailing about, basically. It doesn't look like it should work, but I'm not sure, actually. Move about by just wiggling the engine, I'm not sure if that's possible. So yeah, I've got a lot of extra height, more than I need. It's a very powerful engine, and a single probe is a very, very small payload. So I've got a lot of extra fuel. So this is now me about to separate the fairing. There we go. So yeah, if you've probably seen the footage in real life of the nose cone separating from the top of Sputnik. Any footage that you've actually seen, there was no camera in real life. It was all done as on the stock models that they made for Sputnik, used for propaganda or instructional purposes, just to show what happened. So here we go. This is where I'm going to circularize the orbit. About 90,000. I'm going to try and go for circular, but it's not that important really here. I'm not going to try and catch it up later or anything with another vehicle. So I mentioned the science on it earlier, but other than the transmitter, the only thing it had on it was a thermometer. And the only way to tell what the thermometer read was by the beeps that the transmitter gave out. And I'll talk about that in a second. Oh, there's the separation. That's actually Sputnik or KERBNIK released now. So yeah, I'm switching to the translation mode for RCS so that I can start to push myself along a bit more. I'm trying to return all the rubbish and the booster stages back to leave no debris in orbit because that'll make it difficult later. It'll be difficult because I'm launching Sputnik equatorially, which didn't happen in real life. It was launched from Baikonur, which is in Kazakhstan, or what was the Soviet Union. And just by launching from the north, you automatically give it an inclination, even if you were just flying east. you would still give an inclination that would be similar to the latitude that you are at. Yeah, and that was when I realized that I'd been using the flight computer to control the previous stage, but now I've got Sputnik under control, and I'm facing it towards the sun so that there will be power going through the solar panels and into the battery, so that there'll be some energy in the batteries later when I want to deorbit it. I'm not sure how far in the future I want to, but it's nice to have the option. So yeah, the actual Sputnik didn't actually have solar panels. It had just a battery that was supposed to last for 2 weeks, but I've included solar panels because I want to deorbit it one day. So this is what it actually looked like, a polished metal ball, 2 parts connected by an O-ring, 2 hemispheres with 4 antennas that would just flail about. It wasn't aerodynamic, so it would just transmit these beeps in all directions. And if we have a look inside, this is all that there was to it. It was just a power source, a ventilation fan to stop the power source from overheating the materials, and a radio. But what you can't see is the thermometer, which triggered the ventilation system above 20 at 36 degrees C, and it would turn off again at 20. But if the system detected that it went below 0 degrees C or above 50, it would change Sputnik's pulses to dots and dashes. The length of it would tell the people back on Earth whether it was sub-zero or too hot for the materials, and it helped measure what the atmosphere was like in space. So having a look at what America did, this is the Explorer probe, which was sent after Sputnik 2, but it was America's first real satellite in space. It had 4 antennas as well, but it had its own propulsion stage, so it's probably therefore more like what I've made. Inside, well, you can pause and have a look at this quite a lot. All of these scientific materials, very, very sophisticated compared to what Sputnik was. The program itself, the Explorer program, is still active after 90 missions. Maybe it was just a catchy name, but it's used for many of the scientific-based laboratories that are launched up that are designed to burn up or be reused. It was based on Sputnik's thermometer's readings. They painted black and white stripes on it that would, based on the rotation of the pole of this probe, it would modulate the temperature based between the black and white flashes that would happen when it rotated in front of the sun. So yeah, it was probably the most useful satellite, and it was launched on a Redstone missile, which was called Juno when it wasn't being used in the Mercury program. What else to say? It had a Geiger counter, which measured what they called cosmic rays, and had a very, very low memory spool. It was on a cassette tape that was transmitted, and had very, very, very bad consistency in what could be sent back to Earth. The amount of data, the Geiger counter readings, the temperature readings, the microphone for measuring impacts on the ablative detector, that had very, very sketchy gaps in the data because of the problem of transmission and the lack of data that they could actually hold during transmission periods. For 105 days, and that was until 1970. It was responsible for detecting the Van Allen belts due to the Geiger counter. And this is the Vanguard probe, which looks a lot more like Sputnik actually, except that this one does actually have solar panels to power it. So even though I based my things on the Russians for the names, but it actually is looking more like their American counterparts with solar panels and propulsion. But yeah, this was launched in 1958, just after Sputnik, and these are the internals. It was transmitting for 7 years, but the amazing, amazing thing is that this is still out there. It's still orbiting after God knows how many years. But it's expected that it's going to be there for 240 more years. So that's impressive. That was something that was done in 1958. This one found that there was no hard limit to the drag that the atmosphere had, so which is important now for things like the International Space Station, we know that they have to have some kind of boosters on it to provide propulsion, because it's like flying through a mist of aerosol from a deodorant can, so you need the corresponding push in the opposite direction every so often to keep it level and in orbit. But yes, back to the probe. Let's have a look. This is the debris section, and like I say, I wanted to follow this through to make sure that it did deorbit, that there was no junk left in orbit, so there was no potential Kessler syndrome, which wouldn't be that much of a problem at this point, seeing as there's only one object that the civilization has launched into space. But there we go. And brilliantly, this is on the night side, so you can't actually see anything. So, as you can see, we're going below 62,000 meters, which means we're inside the atmosphere, and the drag should start pulling the orbit to stay within the atmosphere and eventually into the ground. I'm just going to speed this up so that you don't have to watch it all. It did take a very, very long time. And you can see the orbit dropping there. It's now gone into the ground somewhere over the ocean. So I'm hoping that deadly reentry should make it a bit more fun. As you can see, it's starting to go over 1,000 degrees C. C probably means something in Fahrenheit, but you have to learn Celsius. There's no real reason to use Fahrenheit in the world anymore. Pretty fire. Nice re-entry effects that Kerbal Space Program has. Yeah, the way Deadly Reentry works as a mod is that over a certain temperature, over a certain amount of time, it inflicts damage. So a quick piercing entry or a long, slow entry will be bad, but there's a nice, safe cone in between. It's like a sweet spot that you should be able to go through. And it depends on how far you're coming in from, what speed, what angle, etc. I'll have underneath this video the list of all the mods I'm going to be using for this series. I'm running it in Kerbal's Sandbox mode because the career stage in Kerbal doesn't have a nice progression for what I want to do. It's not a very historical progression. I've seen a lot of career-based series, and I wanted to do one that had more of a historical basis, although I'd like to do that in the future, perhaps when Kerbal Space Program has an economic model for me to use. But there we go, it survived. Should have burned up, but it didn't. Maybe because I was in a very low orbit, who knows. Back to 1 times speed to watch it collapse into the water. Boom. Splash. Well, that's that gone. So there's no rubbish in space. KERBNIK is just there now, submitting its beeps. Yep, the KERBNIK probe, there we go. Well, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll be doing the lunar series of probes in the next video and going to the moon in Kerbal Space Program. See you next time.